So what circumstances brought you to Juniata?
I was in graduate school at the University of Maryland in the fall of 1969. Had a friend named Gary Kutcher who said he had been invited to an interview at this place that he couldn't pronounce. He thought it was Juniata College. And would I go with him? And I said, well, why would you want me to go to the interview with you? It's Juniata College, which I knew because John Stauffer was the president of Wittenberg when I was a student at Wittenberg, and then had just recently accepted the presidency at Juniata. So I knew Juniata through that connection. And Kutcher thought this might be sort of a place where people handled snakes, or was kind of a religious place, and he wanted some protection with him on the interview. So I went to the interview with him.
And so when you came, you planned to come and stay for a half century, or
no,
a lot less?
No. When we came, and actually when we were driving back, it was a really crappy day in March. We came for an interview, and there was snow on the ground, and it was dirty and crummy looking. And as we were driving back to Washington, my wife Bonnie said, "If you go there, you're going alone." And so I thought at most we would stay a year or two. Well, for the first 27 years, I was a faculty member in the Department of Economics. Bob Neff announced at a faculty meeting in the spring of 1997 that he was going to retire after the next year, which is 97-98, and that the current provost, who was named Bob Hatala, was going to retire sooner than that. And it was going to be his plan to have an interim provost, and then there would be a search for the provost. And that was all that was said. And then I happened to be walking by Neff's office, coming from the registrar's office and the old founders, and he was walking out the door, and he said, "Jim, would you come in? I'd like to talk to you about something." I went home and talked about it with my wife Bonnie. She said, "Sure, try it." And that was that. And then Tom Keppel came the following year as the president, and he asked me to stay in the position on a full-term basis.
So since you hadn't planned to stay at Juniata, did you plan to stay provost for very long, or did you think it would be a shorter term?
I think 5 years is about the average lifespan for a provost, for lots of reasons. So I actually didn't think a lot about it. I thought, this is something that I'll do for a while, and I will probably go back to teach, because I'll get fired, or the faculty will kick me out, or I'll get into a fight with the president, or something will happen, which is what happened to all the prior provosts who I knew.
What are some situations, some opportunities, whatever that came up where you made a decision and you're not sure that somebody else would have made the same decision? And so in that sense, you put Jim Lakso's stamp on something.
Well, I think there's a couple of things. One is the development of the Center for the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning is something that I'm very proud of. And in that case, it was getting persuaded by Mike Boyle that this would be a really good idea. And Mike Boyle was a guy who, I'm going to do the same thing again here. It was really Mike Boyle's idea. And he sort of encouraged me to implement it, and we took the steps to implement it. We wrote a good grant to the Teagle Foundation. We got the funding for that, and I think it's had the effect. I wouldn't say that it's transformed teaching. That's way too strong, but I think it has had a really good and powerful effect on the way we think about teaching and the importance of teaching here. I think we've encouraged new international programs. Emil Nagengas asked about would it be possible to go to the Gambia with his friend from graduate school from Washington and Jefferson. And so I said yes, and I think that's turned into a terrific program. We've had faculty who have, I think of one of your younger colleagues, Allison Fletcher, who wanted to do a program in South Africa because she was going to be teaching a course. She didn't need a whole lot of money to do that, and we were able to do it, and it's turned into something very good for the history department. So I'm not a big idea guy. It's not what I do. I have some big ideas, but they're the kind of ideas that are hard to see. I think that the important thing that we do here is challenge students and I think we have to simultaneously support them.
Well, I wonder if a better way to ask the question is less sort of concrete policies or proposals or even funding, and more a question of ways in which you were trying to shape the culture of the institution.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one way.
Yes.
Right? Or two ways. Saying yes to things so that people have a sense that if they want to
right, and at the same time, when you're at Juniata a long time, and I began to feel this in the 80s and the 90s, we talked about two ideas here a lot. The one idea was that Juniata was a place where students who weren't very good could come and somehow be transformed into something much better than they were, the Sow's to silk purses idea. If you'll forgive me, that idea is bullshit. My good friend, my dear friend Bill Barrier, when I would say to Bill, what's the baseball team going to be like this year? He would say, Jim, you can't make chicken salad out of chicken shit. And I've got good players this year, so we're going to have a good team. We've got great graduates from Juniata, and it's because they were great students coming in the door. We didn't transform people who were dumb into people who were smart. That doesn't happen. What we did do was to let them know how smart they really were.
And I think you've made it clear on multiple occasions that was something you were mindful of.
Right.
So why don't you talk about that? And I think you've tried to convey culture of the institution
right.
Over that transition as well.
In terms of sort of cultural ideas for places like Juniata, I am very, very suspicious of the idea of community. Because as important as community is and can be, it can also undermine what you're trying to get at in an institution, because sometimes community is used in a way to imply sameness. What I try to do in hiring faculty, and I'm sure I've made this comment to a number of them, is that we're not looking for one particular model. We're not looking for somebody who somehow represents what you're supposed to be when you come to Juniata. We want to hire people who will come here and teach us new things, and we want to hire people who will come here and feel like they are free to be themselves, that there isn't one way of teaching. And really the strength of a community is the diversity that you get that way.
But I'm going to push you just a little bit more on those ideas, because I think one of the things I've heard you say is that the worry that you had was that not just that Juniata had changed, but that higher ed had changed, the times had changed in certain ways, and that it might be difficult or impossible to replace faculty, and some expansion, with faculty who would be as committed, as, I don't know, maybe as talented.
Yeah, and you have that. That is a worry. There were, when I got here, people who would still be regarded as legends at Juniata. Ron and Betty and Cherry and Earl Kaler and Bob Wagner and Ken Rockwell and Don Rockwell. Those are all people who had reputations for really being fabulous teachers, good teachers. So Fillmore Smith. So when they walk out the door, you think, that's it. We're done now. Our best teachers are all gone. But it doesn't take long to find out that you can hire very good people. Yeah, and I'm not saying this to be negative to those really great legends who walked out the door. But we hired really good people to replace them. And I think the faculty is every bit as good now, maybe better than it was when those legends were here. It'll happen the same way when they replace me, by the way.
Yeah.
Right. In 2 years, somebody will say, Lakso, didn't he used to be the provost here or something? Wasn't he on the faculty? And that's just absolutely the way it should be. There are people, freshmen walking in the door next year, who are not going to have known Tom Keppel at all. And in 4 years, they'll say, Keppel, was he the president here, or what was he? So this is a turnover business. And people come and people go. Students are coming and going all the time. So we need to just sort of get over ourselves about that a little bit.
I think the other thing that I remember you saying that you would take heat for, especially among fellow provosts and deans, was spousal hiring.
Uh-huh. That's true.
So, but presumably you had to make arguments, or you felt like you wanted to make arguments back to them. So what did you tell them?
Yeah, there are actually two separate issues. One is the spousal hiring. We have, excuse me, I would say that one of the most difficult things that we have in attracting faculty to come to Juniata is that the person walking in the door will say, well, what will there be for my husband to do? Or what will my wife do if she's here? Or what will my partner do when we come to Huntington? Because it doesn't look like there's a lot of opportunity. And we lose good people in the hiring process. So I just thought that it made sense when we had a good person, and you couldn't name lots of names, when they said, we'd like to split this position, or we'd like to share a position, that it made sense to me to do it. If we hired a good person to begin with, and we wanted to keep that good person, it is true that we did not always interview the spouse. So we made these moves to bring people onto the faculty in some sense without doing full searches, without sort of considering other people that we would add instead. But I think it served to keep really good, high-quality faculty members here. And it is hard. I mean, you do have the situation where you have to treat the faculty as individuals. And for example, if one of them is tenured and the other is not, which is the exact case that every other provost I've ever talked to about this puts to me. What'll happen if one is tenured and the other is not? Well, I said, well, we'll give one tenure and not the other. What's so hard about that? Well, won't that make the good person leave? Well, yeah, but the good person might have left anyway if you hadn't given his or her spouse a job. So I may be proven wrong about this, but I think if I were to have this mental experiment that I'd like to run by the faculty someday, and it is put on a piece of paper the 10 people who you think are the best faculty members at Juniata, and don't define it in any other way. You decide on your own what's the best faculty member. And then we collected all of those names anonymously. I would bet that there would be a large number of names that would be the same on every one of those lists. Faculty know who the great teachers are and who they're not. I could ask the same question about the bottom 10, but I wouldn't ask that question. And I would bet that some number of those people who showed up on that list were spouses, were people who were hired because their husband or their wife was already here, and we made an accommodation to allow them to share a position or to bring them onto the faculty, because I believe in searches until I don't, and sometimes not doing a search is actually the smarter thing to do. Nobody walks out of graduate school being a great teacher. They learn to teach by teaching. And so if we've had an opportunity to see somebody maybe do an adjunct class, or I believe you might have been in that position yourself at one point, right?
Sounds familiar.
It sounds familiar. And I think I would put you in that list of people who are really great teachers. But if we had this sort of hard and fast rule about, nope, sorry, we can't hire you if your spouse is employed here, we would be not as good a place as we are. Now, I come to that position partly personally as well, because when I was a faculty member, Huntington was a hard place for my wife to find a job. And she did apply for a position in the financial aid office and got a letter saying they couldn't consider her for that position in the financial aid office because her husband was employed at Juniata. And that sucked. And of all of the things that, there have been a number of occasions in my career when I thought, well, this maybe isn't the place for me. I should be looking for other. That's the one that comes to my mind the most. So there is, I don't want to psychologize about this, but there may be something personal in this for me as well.